The exercises that we were doing, awake and ready, positive, energetic, enthusiastic, were part of a whole program of spiritual understanding that Swami Kriyananda created about 1978 or 79. Over the course of his astonishingly creative life, he launched innumerable initiatives, many of which just sort of got started and then he went on to something else. And in our community life, there were never enough of us to follow everyone to the end, and we tended to trail after him in whatever he was doing. So many really splendid possibilities for service to others and for personal understanding are still lying dormant, waiting to be explored. I actually, when I go home, I'm going to start writing a book that I need to write, in which, among other things, I hope to chronicle many of the things that were launched but not finished, so that those who feel inspired, so there'll be a record, and so those who feel inspired can follow. Superconscious living I want to talk about a little bit in some of its aspects today, not only for those exercises. Those exercises, he actually recommended you use them in this way. I'm smiling already because as soon as I'm going to say it, you're going to see it, how fun it is. I will explain a little bit about subconscious, conscious, and superconscious because it's very relevant to what we're talking about in how to, it's another way of looking at the same subject. But when we sleep, obviously, we're in a subconscious mode. And then we wake into the conscious level, and the question is, how dynamically are we going to jump into the reality that we have to? So Swami's suggestion was, at the first sign of wakefulness, you hop out of bed and you say, I'm awake and ready. And then you immediately say, I'm positive, energetic, enthusiastic. So before your conscious mind has any opportunity to say, oh, another day, you fall out of bed and are doing these things. Of course, you feel so comical doing them. Half of their effectiveness is that you feel so comical while you're acting it out that by the time you're finished, you're laughing because you can hardly believe you're standing here going like this. We also use these exercises a lot with children. And if you have a child or work with children, because they can really get behind it, and how high can they jump when they're enthusiastic, and it has exactly the effect that it's supposed to have. It takes energy, it raises it, and it shifts it. Now, we set the basis in all our discussion yesterday about being a radio receiver and picking up on the waves. So here's another aspect of it. And today we're talking about sharing, living, giving. Those of you who don't reside here will have to drive down that road and go back to another reality, which feels a little different than this one. But the consistent thread is your own consciousness. If you were here, you were there. If you felt at all uplifted, peaceful, optimistic here, that's inside of you, and that you're carrying with you. Yogananda had a wonderful phrase. We each have within us a portable paradise, is what he called it. I heard that phrase when I was about 18 years old, and I've always really enjoyed it. Just whenever things are not going well, I remind myself that I have within me a portable paradise. And wherever I am, it is. And at least in theory, I can always get there. Now, Swamiji talks about, and this is not, he didn't make this up, but this is how he describes, that there are 3 essential levels of consciousness that we're working with. These are not, exact Sanskrit words, but this is a general feeling of what it's like. He called it subconscious, conscious, superconscious. Now, subconscious has a certain psychological meaning. Jung and others gave meaning to this idea of subconscious. So I'm not talking about it as if I were a psychology professor. I'm talking about it more from the point of view of yoga. Subconscious is basically everything that you've done up until this point. When we think of our own awareness as a moving reality, we are a flow of energy. Swamiji once remarked that he said, if you're going to judge your accomplishments, and then he parenthetically added, which I don't recommend, he said, recognize that by the time anything has been done, by definition, it's already behind you. Because if it's there, you're moving on. The you that created it, the reality that made it, in the next moment, we're into another flow. And we ourselves are just a flow of energy. And he said, if you're going to evaluate yourself, he said, evaluate yourself according to your aspirations. Because your aspirations are the magnet which is drawing your energy toward it. So what you aspire to become is a more true definition of who you are than what you are right now. You see how nicely optimistic that is, too. So in this context, subconscious represents everything that's already been done. Already been done in this incarnation, already been done in all the incarnations before. It's another way of describing the vrittis and the chakras, really. In other words, it's the habitual self. So, because I was amused, a woman achieved the position of being the conductor of an orchestra, I believe in Europe, and she may have been the first woman to become an orchestra conductor. So someone asked her, how does it feel to be a woman orchestra conductor? She said, well, you see, I've been a woman for a really long time. As for being an orchestra conductor, I'm thrilled. So we've been a woman or a man or an Indian or an American or a Spaniard, whatever we might have been, we've been it for a really long time. And so we have all these fixed ideas of what that might mean. We've also had all those past life experiences. And just as I was saying yesterday, how all those experiences create magnetism, and they have a tendency to want us to just stay where we are. Of course, a certain kind of effortless comfort is there to just repeat the patterns that we know. It's easier to just keep going in the direction we're going than it is to exert the willpower to go in a new direction. That's why, and I went through it at great length yesterday, we don't have to do it again. We tend to just think the way we've always thought. So even though some people describe the subconscious as the source of a great deal of inspiration, in this way of talking about it, it is merely the accumulated reality of everything that you've already done. It's exactly like a computer that's programmed in a certain way. And that material can be rearranged, but no really startlingly new realities can come from it. And if it's garbage in, as they say in computer programming, it's garbage out. And so whatever you've put into it is what comes out of it. Now, the true source of creativity, inspiration, innovation is the superconscious side. And the superconscious is, if you think of ourselves as a triangle like this with our little ego self at the point of the triangle, but even though we only live in a tiny fragment of who we are, we actually expand out in this way to connect with infinity. The question of the soul, where does it live? You know, the infinite, the individual self coming from the astral world to inhabit the sperm and ovum to create the baby, then that soul consciousness is identified with the body and stays in the medulla. But that doesn't mean that's the limit of our consciousness. It's just once we've become identified with this physical body, we lose the capacity to perceive other realities. I mean, this is a great metaphysical implication, but it also is just self-evident. The more deeply I'm identified, let's say with being an American, Americans have very bad reputation around the world because they tend to be so deeply identified as Americans, they tend not to know where they are. Swami tells the story about his mother. His family lived all over the world, and his parents, I knew his parents, they were extremely refined and sophisticated people. And Swami was born in Romania, and they lived in Egypt, they lived in France, so they did not have that quality. So his mother was in a restaurant in Paris. She spoke perfect French. And there was an American man trying to persuade the waiter to bring him a cup of coffee with his dinner. And the waiter just wouldn't bring the coffee. So Gertrude Walters, Swami's mother, thought she would intercede. So she explains in excellent French that this man wants a cup of coffee with his dinner. The waiter responds in French, "Madam, I understand perfectly what he wants, but I refuse to allow him to ruin his dinner." That was that. Now, both the Frenchman and the American were wrong. But nonetheless, this is what happens. We become deeply identified. We can't see realities other than our own, like that. In a much more cosmic sense, because we are identified with this one incarnation, we lose track of eternity. We think we are born, we think we die, we think life ends when we die, we become attached and identified. A picture I often draw is a wheel like this, a circle, and eternity is in the center. And we are a little dot, just like a little circle on the rim of the wheel. But because we deeply identify with that dot, we can't see the past, we don't know about the future, and we think that eternity is really far away. And as we begin to expand our consciousness, what actually happens is we move toward eternity. We move toward the center. And then our perspective widens. And we begin to understand the influence of the past. We may even remember past lives. At least we become aware of the influence of our past actions. We begin to see the implications of our future actions. And when we move all the way to eternity, the past, the future, the present, it's all equidistant from the eternal now as we think of it, right? So our superconscious self is this little dot expanding until it touches eternity, and then the whole circle of reality is known to us. Now, wherever we live, some bit of that superconsciousness from time to time breaks through. Anybody who does creative work and really enters into that kind of creative flow, there's a certain, creativity can come either subconscious or superconscious. Subconscious is just reassembling my own reality and presenting it again. And subconscious creativity has personal meaning, and a few people may relate to it, but it doesn't speak to everyone's consciousness. Superconscious creativity is where great art comes from. Because no matter what the form, if it's the Mona Lisa or the David or Beethoven's symphony, there's something in it that everybody recognizes. It's not merely personal meaning. It has a universal quality to it. So what happens also, you see, when we move into superconscious is we begin to break out of our limited identity and we begin to unite our consciousness with all of creation. You know, what happens when you come even into nature is that all of a sudden you realize that you're part of this greater flow. This is, with all due respect, since most of you live in cities, this is the curse of cities, is that we are pushed into a deep, a rather isolated identity of myself, my small apartment, maybe my family. But when we step outside of it, we are reluctant to embrace the reality that's around us because it feels dissonant, perhaps, to our own vibration. This is why retreat, such as this one, where you can strengthen your inner sense of connectedness to a greater reality, gives you the tools that you need to live even in very crowded circumstances. I lived isolated for many years, but when I finally went back into the city, where I've lived now for more than 25 years, I had a sense of my own connectedness to a greater reality that makes everybody else's reality so much easier to absorb, less threatening to me. Now, I'm not really going to do the whole story here, but I want to just get this picture in your mind. Subconscious is who we have been, what we have already accomplished in a sense. Superconscious is where we're going. Subconscious is a rearranging of what we already know. Superconscious is the way the infinite gives us new inspiration, new realities, new directions, new intuitions. The conscious level doesn't actually exist as an independent level of consciousness, even though we think it does. Okay? The conscious mind is the battleground where everything that we've been and everything that we could become acts it out. It's Kurukshetra, literally. It's the downward pulling habits of the past meet the upward aspirations of the future, and we have to just stand there and figure out which side we're going to choose. And if our past has been relatively joyful, since our conversation here is about happiness, it's not like everything in the past is your enemy. It's just a question that I was speaking of yesterday, of whether we expand, continue to expand. The learning new realities and accepting new realities is in the superconscious direction. Following the comfortable habit is in the subconscious direction. And what we have to realize in our lives, and you can think about God and gurus and all kinds of other things, but this is the essential battle. Which side do I choose? Do I choose to constantly expand my awareness, or do I just let low energy and the habits of the past just keep me moving the way I've always been moving? I'm awake and ready, I'm positive, energetic, enthusiastic, is pushing us toward an expanded reality, to solve our problems by, instead of just sinking into a torpor or trying to find an easy way to get through it, to say I'm positive, energetic, enthusiastic. That's why he tied these exercises to superconscious living. Raises our energy, raises our enthusiasm, raises our joy level, and then that puts us on the radio station of superconsciousness. This is why you see so often when you meet spiritual people that they're just very bright-eyed and ready. And it's almost a joke in our community, kind of how bright-eyed and ready we are. Just whatever comes next, we're just out there to do it. And it's not an accident. It's a deliberately cultivated way of life. And I spoke yesterday of the energization exercises and how powerfully they allow us to be able to draw that energy in and draw that energy to a focus. I was talking this morning to a friend about, all of you who hadn't seen it before, I believe, saw the movie about Ananda last night. It's sort of amazing to see what's been accomplished. This land here, even though, there's a long way to go compared to the gardens and the buildings that you saw at Ananda Village, but even what's been done here is inexplicable in terms of the number of people involved and the resources that we've actually been able to bring to bear. But when individuals combine their energy, and this is what community is about, whether it's physical community or spiritual community, however we do it, when we identify with a reality greater than our individual self, first with the divine, and then in that divine union with each other, a real revolution can happen. I've seen that Finding Happiness movie, it might be close to 30 times, counting all the times we watched it when we were editing and trying to form it, and how many different versions I've shown to how many different groups. That might be exaggerated, but when I counted, it really started coming close to that. And yet I just sit down and watch it again. Of course, Swamiji is there and his vibration is so beautiful, but I also learn something every time. Juliet, the reporter, says to him, how can this small group of people really have such an effect on the planet? And he says, society pretty much crosses itself out, cancels itself out. You know, a few people who are really committed have an effect far out of proportion to their numbers. Now, that conversation was taking place in the context of the effect of small communities on the social fabric of the world. But he's also talking about one individual who's deeply committed to certain ideals and the power that commitment has just to cut through whatever chaos or confusion or contradictory realities are around you. Practically speaking, it's easier if you have support. And if you are geographically isolated, say, God bless the internet. Even last night, at 8 o'clock, at the time we were supposed to start the movie, they were having what has become a pattern. There's a global meditation that a group of the next generation of Ananda has. And all over the world, at whatever time it is, they all sit down in front of their Skype computers and everybody meditates together and chants together and prays together. It has a startlingly real effect. Everybody tuning their energy together. I've been very impressed, you know, just especially when you can do it in real time, when you're part of something that's being live streamed. But even afterwards, you can feel it and receive it. Now, here's what I'm wanting to say about that. Swamiji has told a number of stories, and we hear about them all the time, about individuals who were saved from catastrophe or, you know, rescued from a cataclysm, just because their individual magnetism separated themselves from the energy that was going on around them. Master says, you know, that even in group karma, if your ray of energy is strong enough, you will find yourself taken out of that. One of the women in our community, her mother was going to visit her from the city of Chicago to California. And the daughter and the mom had a reservation and everything. And the daughter called her mom and said, you know, I don't know, it just doesn't feel like a good time to visit. Why don't you come next week? And the mother was a little annoyed, but she canceled her reservation, set it for the next week. That plane went down that she was supposed to have been on, and everyone was killed. And just because the daughter was a disciple and was meditating, she just was attuned to a greater reality. She could feel it coming somehow. She didn't know any of that. She didn't even have a bad feeling. She was just guided to say, this is not the time for you to come. There's a story of a man in Japan when there was an earthquake, and he was a lawyer in a courtroom, and there was a slide because of the earthquake, and the whole courtroom was crushed. He was delivering his argument, and he had a terrible tick in his throat, and he started coughing so hard he had to walk out of the building. He walks out of the building, and the whole thing comes down, just in that moment. Swamiji tells the story about two religious communities in Japan that were in the cities that America dropped the nuclear bombs on, the atomic bombs on. There was a community of nuns and a community of monks, and everything around them was destroyed, but their dwelling places and they were not. And you can't explain these things by human reason. It's that if our energy, if we have consistently moved our energy from the habit patterns of the past to attunement with the future, to attunement with the expanded self, then we ourselves are drawn into a higher reality. Now, when I first came to India and was on our tourist bus, I explained to you all, I first came leading a pilgrimage tour. The first pilgrimage tour we led, Durga and Vidura and I and my husband David, 3 of the 4 leaders had never been to India. David had been, and we didn't know anything. We had local guides. They would explain things to us, and then I would turn around and pretend that I was an authority. And I pulled it off. But we had a great time in any case. So I'm looking out the window at India for the first time. And the concept of overpopulation is something that we study in school. But you have to come here or to China or to some place where it actually exists before you get it. There are just a lot of people here, really a lot of people. And there are not quite the resources to support them all in a comfortable way. And every issue gets complicated by the fact that there are so many people. And looking out at it, my whole thought about how we help to change the world, has to be readjusted to reality, to all those karmas just acting themselves out. And I felt profoundly, as I have felt many times before, but in that moment it struck very deeply. The only solution to our individual lives, the only solution to society and the globe is a change of consciousness. And all the problems that we have, Swamiji said that in the movie over and over again, people are taking too much and giving too little. And the reason people are taking so much is because they think they need that much. That's what Peter Goring said. If everyone at Ananda, if everyone in the world lived like we do at Ananda, we wouldn't have any of these problems. That was actually, he was quoting Swamiji in that when someone tried to persuade Swamiji to put strong energy behind some ecological crisis that people often come to Ananda and see us as an organized group and would like to sort of get us en masse on board whatever their issue is. So that was the ecological issue. And Swami listened attentively, and these are all true. But his answer was, if everyone in the world lived like we do at Ananda, we wouldn't have any of these problems. That the problems are problems of consciousness. That we have all the technology, we have all the wealth, we have all the understanding that we need to make this world a paradise. We don't make it a paradise because people don't want a paradise. They want a place where they can have power, where they can be greedy, where they can lord it over others, all of the different things that you can say to criticize. So we have a global issue that we're working with, and we also have an individual issue that we're working with. We have the individual reality of how I feel and what I do and how my life goes and how I influence my own karma. And then we have the global issue of what's going to happen to the whole story. Very early and very briefly in my life, I was interested in political change. I mentioned that yesterday. There's some old edition of the Stanford Daily with me coming out of the administration building carrying a pillow from having occupied that building for a few days, imagining that we could accomplish something that we might want to accomplish, right? But I very quickly realized that it's like pushing the same pieces around if you try to move it like that. Because until the vibration of consciousness of individuals changes, nothing will change. So where I'm coming back to with all of that is, do not underestimate the power of your own consciousness, both to influence your own destiny and also to fulfill whatever aspirations you might have, be it for the harmony of your family, the success of your job, the harmony of the planet, whatever it might be. We are constantly creating these vibrations, and these vibrations are what creates, Yogananda said, even the weather. In America or in other parts of the world, we're having these really extreme weather conditions. I'm not going to be able to describe it exactly, but Yogananda in 1938 or 39 wrote this paragraph like this of the relationships of this country invaded this country, and then there was a tornado over here, which caused influenza over here, which caused depression over here. And he went through some of the historical things that had just happened in the last so many years, and he linked each one to the other. These forces. Our friends in Italy were saying, we have a community in Assisi now where would it have been? But right across the water, there was terrible ethnic wars going on. And our friends talked about sometimes, and the only word they could use was an evil wind would blow from that direction. that you could feel the dark energy that was going on over there, and it would come over and affect them. And Master has said that a great deal of the chaotic weather that we're now beginning to experience is because of the dissonant thoughts of men, of mankind. That we have this idea that we can get away with it. That like collectively as a species we can get away with it, or individually that we can get away with it. I was listening to Swami say this morning, people have no idea how powerful and real our individual thoughts are. That we have bad thoughts, or we think ill of people, and we just think it just dissipates. I didn't say it out loud so nobody knows. Or we complain inside ourselves, and we don't realize that we're constantly just polluting the atmosphere. And that becomes the world in which we live. But the other side of it is, we also have no idea how powerful our personal commitment can be to just say, my conscious mind is the battleground between these two forces, pulling me back into isolation and separateness, or liberating me into expansive union with all. And walking away from this atmosphere, and having even just a glimpse of what we can do together. The single most important thing is to make a resolution, in your own heart, to be part of the solution. This is exactly what Swamiji said. Energy is going two directions now. This is a time, according to Sri Yukteswar, this is the beginning of Dwapara Yuga, which is an age of energy, and Kali Yuga, the age of matter, the darkest age that our planet goes through. It's over, but it's still holding on. And we are in a transition that our master said was not going to be a smooth one. And really, you don't have to be a prophet to be able to see that we have a lot of issues going on, and we really don't know how they're going to resolve. And Swamiji said most of the time, humanity is shaped like a cigar, is how he puts it. And a few people are good, and a few people are bad, and most everyone hangs out sort of in the middle. Neither really good nor really bad. He said at times like these, humanity divides up more like a dumbbell, like this, where it's very thin in the middle. And there's a lot more force of evil energy, and then there's also a lot more force of good. And it's not so easy to hang out in the middle, because on both ends it's pulling too hard. In my country, what's happening is that wealth is just being stripped away from the middle class, so to speak, and becoming concentrated more and more in just a few hands. And the people who have money are just out of their minds with what they're doing with it, and who have access to money. That's what I was saying yesterday. The radio stations are always talking about money. And everybody in the middle is just sort of losing their ground a little bit. It certainly hasn't come to pieces yet, but it promises to. And of course, if America really rattles, a lot of other countries are going to rattle too. Swamiji actually says it'll be less difficult in India than America. He said America's falling from a bigger height, and so the fall is going to be harder. India is growing upward, and also is much more accustomed to living simply and getting along with less than we are in America. So we'll see what happens for all of that. But this is not a time to be sitting on the sidelines. And everybody can feel it. I travel through your cities, and my, this is challenging living. Traffic jams and noise and crowding and all of that. This is not a time when you can be neutral. If you don't actively participate in an upward moving flow of energy, the very environment will just exhaust you. And that's what a lot of people are finding. We're just getting worn out. But we don't have to, because even a little practice of this commitment to divine consciousness will change us very greatly. And one of the most important ways, and this is what we're talking about today, is really how we treat one another. We make each other miserable, we make ourselves miserable because of each other, or we become actual conscious instruments of divine light in the world. And if you think about it, I used to work When I was a teenager, I had a job in a department store. It was a job given to high school seniors. It was sort of like an apprentice program for becoming having a career in retail marketing. I just took it for the money, but I was there anyway doing it. And so I would stand in a shop all day. It was a very nice store that I was in. And I was amazed how one nice customer could change my entire day. Just one person who came into the store and actually greeted me like a person, was cheerful with me, gave me some humanity in my position. That all day long I would feel very happy about what I was doing. It was a very small experience, but it always stuck in my mind that we think, that our actions are of no consequence. And of course, if I was happier, I went home happier. I was happier to my parents. If the daughter was happy, the parents were happier. When the parents went off to work the next day, they were more cheerful because their daughter was fine. I mean, I've seen television ads now that run just exactly on this. One person, nice, 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 nice. And that's the sign of ascending energy. But if each one of us makes a deep resolution in our hearts to be an instrument of superconscious energy to one another, and not allow the habit of, oh, I'm mad at you because you've treated me so badly. Oh, I have to stand up for myself, or I know I'm going to be taken advantage of. I play a little game with myself, which is because I have an accurate mind and a way of looking at things, I used to be very critical of everyone. It's a factor of my own unrest, but nonetheless, I used to be very critical. And I have since learned, through hard and painful experience, because what we sow, that's what we reap. I learned this in a very interesting saga. When I had to write the first book I wrote, which was about Swami Kriyananda, I actually spent 3 years trying to write it before I was able to write it. And it was a marvelous period spiritually. It was a terrible period as a writer, but it was a marvelous period spiritually. In 3 years, I didn't have one usable sentence. That's pretty impressive, isn't it? Because what I got to act out was a lifetime of criticism. A lifetime of always noticing what was wrong with other people and always criticizing them. And it all concentrated on every sentence I wrote. Every sentence I wrote, I just automatically criticized. And so I had to delete it. And at the end of 3 years, I had nothing, but I had learned a fantastic life lesson. I said to Swamiji on the phone, except for the fact that I have nothing in terms of the book, this has been the most important period of my life. Just to finally understand what it feels like to always be criticized and how paralyzing that reality is. I mean, God just put me right there. And then when I got over that, I sat down and wrote the book. It took me a year to write it still, but once I broke through that reality. So now I play this marvelous game. I love this game, which I still see the world as I've always seen it. I can understand people. Sometimes I know where they are, but I always try to rephrase whatever I see in terms of that soul's aspiration toward the light. If somebody's incredibly inappropriate in the way they express themselves, I think instead, what a creative way to say it. Or if someone just has a worldview that I could just never imagine, I just think how remarkable it is that every one of us stands inside our own reality and the world just looks perfectly reasonable to them. And it is true that the most powerful gift that we can give to everyone is a sympathetic understanding of why what they're doing makes sense to them. In my own life, again, as all of you have had to go through, we all do things that we afterwards wonder why we thought about them. We become ashamed of what we did, we're embarrassed, we have a deep sense of regret, we really wish that we didn't do it. I went through a cycle of being very angry at someone for what I thought were his mistakes. And one day I finally realized that he had done the best that he could do. He didn't get up in the morning and try to do something awful, even though he had done, in my mind, some fairly awful things. with the understanding he had done the best that he could do. And it took me a really long time to figure out that with the understanding I had also done the best that I could do. You know, we think that we have to always be pounding on ourselves, and we also pound on others with the same energy, not realizing that compassion and sympathy and understanding draws much more out of each other. And the exercise in our own mind, you see, subconscious is where we are deeply identified with this individual body, and therefore my way is the way things are, and all of you are a bit odd, aren't you? Look at you, just being different than me. How can you not see it like I see it when it's so obvious that my way is right? That's where the subconscious is, because it's identified only with this. This is the American who wants coffee with his dinner, and the French waiter who refuses to give it to him. You know, two ridiculous points of view. I'm going to tell you another French story, and I'll come back to this in just a moment. This is actually, apparently became an international incident. I read this in a book. Two Americans buy a ticket to the top of the Eiffel Tower, but halfway up, they decide to get out on the platform. But the elevator operator will not let them out because their tickets are for the top. So apparently this blows up, and it becomes a French-American incident. And the Americans insist that our philosophy, the customer is always right. The Frenchman says, it's my job to take people where their tickets say they're supposed to go. And the Americans define business in terms of what they're doing for the customer. The French define business in terms of having my job defined and carrying it out. I mean, how ridiculous can that be? But nonetheless, it all apparently actually happened and got everybody involved in this conversation. Now, taken like that, it seems silly. But when your coworker wants to do the project a little bit this way and you want to do it that way, and when your sister-in-law thinks that the eggplant should be seasoned in this way and the pot should be kept over here, and when your mother-in-law doesn't like the way you're taking care of the baby, you know, all of a sudden it's a whole different story, isn't it? Now, it's not like, and please understand me, to identify deeply and defend our own individuality from the point of view of blinders and not being able to understand that anybody else is even out there. I had a relative who talked almost without ceasing in such a way that it never related to anybody else. And I said to my husband, I don't think that person knows there's anybody else out there. I think they're living so much in their subconscious identity with themselves that they don't even know, even though they're talking, there's nobody out there because they're only in this reality. So if somebody's asking something of you that you don't want to do, it doesn't mean that you have to go along with them, but you have to fight the battle to step into the superconscious vibration and at least be able to see that there's more than one force here. The power of superconsciousness also is that's where your guiding intuition comes. The superconscious is where all separateness eventually resolves into harmony. This is where Dharma finally brings victory. But of course, it doesn't mean that everybody's ego is pleased. But we can do what we need to do either from superconsciousness, from a sense of loving unity with the world around us, but this is still right. Or we can do what we need to do from a position of complete isolated, this is what I want and nobody else's reality matters. You see how different it can be? It can be even the same action. I'm sorry, I'm not able to do what you want. I learned when I had someone working for me who constantly made unreasonable demands, who was very much caught in their own desires and often made suggestions that there was just no way to do it. But I gradually went from saying no to realizing that to this person, this actually seems like a reasonable plan. And they really want it, or else they wouldn't be asking it. So I just changed this much. It was so simple. Wow, that could be wonderful if we could do it. I'd really like to see that happen. And then say, but I wonder if, you know, I wonder how we could do that. I wonder how that would relate to this. But the difference between somebody coming to you with energy and you're saying no, and people coming to you with energy and you're saying yes, is the difference between separation and unity. And the fact of the matter was, it wasn't a trick on my part. Swami Kriyananda once, somebody came to him and said, you know, I read in this management book that it says, before you criticize anyone, you should say 2 things that are good about them. And Swamiji answered, he said, that's so manipulative. And then he also said, and any sensitive person will see through it right away. I mean, such an idea is, oh, here's a way to manipulate you so that I'll get my way. That's entirely different than actually looking at someone and realizing that even though their brain works in a way that seems completely nuts to you, to them, it makes perfect sense. And it's fascinating sometimes to think, how could they possibly think this is a good idea? You know? Or how could they possibly think that this is actually reality? Or why are they talking to me like this? But not the point of view of why are they talking to me like this, but wow. Except don't fold your arms. Wow. Why are they talking to me like this? And you can just, I don't know, it all becomes light. I'm awake and ready. I'm positive, energetic, and enthusiastic. Here we are, and we have to figure this out. We have to find a way to go forward, and sometimes you have to go forward in your jobs. You know, family, friends, and colleagues are all 3 different realities. Because colleagues, often you have a project, and you have only so much margin to help people learn. Relatives, sometimes, as Master said, at least we can choose our friends. God gives us our relatives, but He allows us to choose our friends. Sometimes we're trapped, and we have family members, and the superconscious answer to it can be complicated. Because I was saying on Sunday morning, where many of you were present, you know, they are not necessarily more important than you, and you are not necessarily more important than them. The question is, what is the Dharma here? What is the right thing to have happen? Where are we going, and what is the right thing to have happen? But we can't tell if we're habituated always. Whenever the battle between superconscious and conscious happens, we just jump over into the subconscious side, superconscious and subconscious. Well, this is what I want. This is what I like. This is what I'm comfortable with. No, we have to exercise our will and say, how can I expand? How can I learn? What can I do? And above all, it's really, well, you see, meditation, again, we always come back to meditation. Meditation is, or something like it, some capacity to quiet yourself down enough so that you can, 1, hear a higher vibration, and so that you can also feel the fact that you are more. We are more than just this little reality that we're living in. And when we feel it in ourselves, when we become quietly and profoundly conscious of the multi-dimensions of our own nature, then it's really not that hard to see it in others. You know, that's why self-realized souls, free souls like Swamiji, he just sees us differently. It was his habitual way of greeting us was always to say, hello, great souls. He would say like that. He would always call us great souls. And it was a sweet thing to do, but it was much more than sweet. He just looked at us and he saw that we were great souls. And having him continually and regularly respond to you in that way. And I'll tell you another, he always respected our individual freedom, and he never saw us in terms of how we could serve either him personally or the cause to which he was dedicated. I worked to him as his secretary for a number of years. And during those years especially, he was writing The Path. And that was the last book he wrote without a computer. He wrote it on an electric typewriter because computers hadn't come out yet. As soon as the first computer was there, Swami had it. He was an early adapter, is what they call these people in marketing. And so after The Path, he had the computer to work on, the word processing aspect of it. So The Path, however, I was his typist. So the manuscript had to be typed and retyped, and he was a very careful editor, especially of that book. Well, of all books, but really of that book. And he always needed a clean sheet. If there was any marks on the page, he couldn't tell if it was finished. So if he'd marked even one word with a pencil, I had to type it again. And I'm a fast typist, I mentioned that. And so I typed that book many, 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 many times. I loved typing that book. It was just a joy to type that book. The way our lives worked, Swamiji was alone all day, and he would work, and at 4 in the afternoon, I and Seva and sometimes Kalyani would show up at his house. We had no telephones. The mail delivery was 1.5 miles from his house, so we would show up with all the messages of the day in the mail. He would have been writing all day, and I would then type the pages that he'd worked on, and often I would stay there till late at night, maybe sometimes cooking supper. I never made any plans at all, ever. I was at his house at 4. I never had any plans for the evening, no commitments, because this was the only thing I really wanted to do, and I never wanted to not be available. He knew this perfectly well. Every time I would come in, well, sir, how are you? Hello, great souls. Would you like some tea? We'd sit down and talk. Sir, did you do a lot of work today? Oh, I had a great writing day. Then you probably have a lot of manuscript pages. Is that so? Yes. And I would always have to say, may I type them? I was there to type them. Or he would say something like, if you don't have anything else to do, perhaps it would help me if you would type a few of those pages. He never said, there are the pages. Here you are, the manuscript typist, type the pages. It was always like I was a friend who had just arrived, and if I felt like it, it would be a great help to him if I could type those pages. And I, of course, quickly learned what the drill was and volunteered very quickly. Now, it wasn't that he was manipulating me at all. It was genuinely that when I left the house, he never assumed that I would return. He never saw me as someone who's going to show up every day at 4 and is going to do these certain things. Every time I came in, it was, oh, there you are again. And, oh, this project needs to be taken care of. And, well, how kind of you to take care of it. Now, imagine how magnetic that is. You're just eager to do what you can. Appreciation doesn't begin to describe it. And it wasn't a matter of, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you. He was very careful with his words. He never overspoke. If he said something was good, it was good. If he said it was excellent, it was excellent. If he said it was okay, it was okay. And so you always knew that he was telling you exactly what was true. He tried to do it in a way that was supportive, but you had absolute trust that he was honest with you. In fact, I used to write letters for him, and he trained me. I would compose letters for him, is what I mean, and he would read them and fix them and sign them. Once someone sent him some poetry, and I wrote on his behalf, thank you for the beautiful poetry. He read that. He said, it wasn't beautiful. He says, what will you do when someone actually sends beautiful poetry? He said, you've used up the word here on poetry that is merely nice. Just exactly. So I recomposed it to say, we're so happy to see your creative work. Right? I mean, it was true. And he was. He was happy that this person was writing poetry. His poetry was bad, but he was still writing poetry. And he was happy about that. And just very consciously, just looking at how can I help and how can I be truthful simultaneously. And where that comes from, freedom of the heart and a genuine concern for others. Now, of course, what happens when you live like this is, number one, that's the energy that's always rolling through you. I'm very, I have to say, pleased with myself that whenever I see something wacky in the world, I find now that my inner wordsmith just finds a really nice way to describe it. And it's truthful still, but I'm going with their energy, trying to take them where they're trying to go, instead of against their energy, trying to push them down and make them more like me. Now, the pleasure of that is all mine. The pleasure of that is that that's the world that I can live in now. You know, it's a much more pleasant world. And then, of course, you have more friends, and people really like you. I have a few friends in my life. I have a lot of friends in my life, but a few friends who really stand out in my life, who are just, and the only word is, they're so wonderfully supportive. They're not effusive. They're just wonderfully supportive. They're just people who you know are always there, really wanting the best for you. And that was Swami Kriyananda to every single person he met. People would exchange 2 emails with him, and then afterwards they would decide he was their best friend. Because he was. He was really their best friend, even though, you know, he could see them for exactly who they were better than anybody in the world. In the very early years, I was his appointment secretary at a time when he was very available. He used to give Sunday services at our retreat, which looked about like this at that time. And afterwards, people could come to me and I would make appointment times. He would sit in the little dome where he lived at that point. This is, for those of you who saw the film, The Meditation Retreat, the first place. He would sit in the dome and he would talk to people. I think the appointments lasted about 15 minutes each. I was trying to remember that. I would sit outside on the porch, and I realized my job sitting outside on the porch was to calm down the person who was going to see him next. Because they were so nervous because they were going to be nose to nose with Swami Kriyananda, and their concern was that he will see me completely. They had the feeling that he could see them. And I gradually began to realize that we walk around all the time and everybody is judging everybody else. Well, that's not really a very attractive dress, is it? What makes her think wearing her hair like that looks good? Oh, he really needs to go on a diet, you know. It's just all the time, isn't it so? And much worse than that. And I said, you're with probably the only man on the planet who has nothing but good thoughts toward you. You know, if you're going to be nervous all the rest of the time. This is not the time to be nervous. This is the one time when you can know with your whole heart that you will be loved for who you are. What a gift. Why should we limit it to Swami Kriyananda? When I was first working also at that retreat kitchen, my first job at Ananda was running the kitchen. I was cooking every day for 30-some people, 3 meals a day, 6 days a week. 7th day I got in the truck and went and bought stuff so I would have stuff to cook the next 6 days. Every other Sunday, Swami Kriyananda came and gave Sunday service, and then we served lunch for the whole community. Every other Sunday, I got up early, worked for hours to make the best possible meal I could make. On the alternate Sundays, I didn't. I just kind of opened the fridge in the last hour and thought what was there and just put it out. And I went on like that for longer than I'm proud to admit. And then one day, first of all, I realized that I don't think Swamiji would really like this. The fact that I was so careful for him and so careless for everyone else. That was hardly his style. And the second thing I realized is I enjoyed the Sundays when I did my best much more than I enjoyed the days that I didn't. And I also realized that yes, Swamiji was and is a beautiful soul, but what I really enjoyed was how much I loved him. And it occurred to me that I could love other people this much too. I don't have to be so stingy. I could take the same care for him. The impetus to take care for him was not for him, it was for me. So that I could understand what it felt like to really care for people. I had a humorous experience with Swamiji in this way. There were 2 people in my life, 2 women, one of whom I had terrible karma with, and we just disliked each other so much, so much. The other one I had wonderful karma with, and I just loved her completely. And I was so confused. All I can say is that I was really young on the path. So I came to Swamiji one day, and I was trying to work this out. Sir, I figured it out. The problem is that it's not so much that I dislike this one, because he was fully aware of this. It's not so much that I dislike this one, but I love this one too much. So if I loved her less, then maybe I'd like this one more. He was rarely sarcastic with me, but this is one of them. That is the stupidest idea I have ever heard. That's what he said. I sort of blinked. What's wrong? But then very seriously, he said, God gives us these effortless love relationships to teach us the joy of loving so much. And the point then is to learn to love everyone that much. And that, of course, is what it's about. So, yeah, we do have these gifts in our lives. And Swamiji often would say to us, he said, some people spend more time with me, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're even, he said, it doesn't necessarily even mean that they're closer to me. And I love everyone just the same. Now, really think about that. Imagine loving everyone just the same, no matter who they are. But the free souls are brought to the world to give us some idea of what our own potential is. Someone asked me in a radio interview for finding happiness, what's the hardest part of being at Ananda? I shared this with some of you recently. And she mentioned the fire burning down. I said, oh no, the fire was fun. The fire was fun. It was really exciting and energizing and fantastic to work so hard and then lose so much and then have to figure out what to do. I mean, that was like one of the great moments of growing up. The hardest thing is to realize how much it is possible to love one another by the example that Swami gave us, and then still always having the opportunity to go for more. It's really quite something. But nothing less than that, here's the point, will ever satisfy us. And absolutely everything that we want will come to us through that kind of love. In this article that was recently published by the writer who was here yesterday, he asked some question about Ananda, what's the best thing about it? And I actually gave it some real thought. And this is what I came to. If I were in trouble, emotional trouble, physical trouble, financial trouble, if I lost shelter, if I didn't have health, there are, I think, just at my first glance, there's probably 100 people in the world I could call, at least, and say, I'm in trouble. You know, I could say, I'm in South Africa and I'm stuck. And they would drop everything to help me. And I know that as a fact. There's no circumstance I could find myself in that somebody wouldn't come and help me. And there's at least that many or more who would call me, who with the same absolute faith. And I know in myself, yes, I would drop everything. I would take care of them. Now that's security. You know, that's really what that we're looking for. We are always trying to build up something, but we're trying to build it up all by ourselves. And we're not trying to build it out of super conscious union with others. Many years ago, Ananda was embroiled in this litigation. We were being sued, and it looked like some of our property might be lost. It was just one of the trials that people have to go through in the course of doing good work. And the community that we live in Palo Alto, we don't even own it actually, we just lease it. So there was no actual fact that it could have been taken away from us. But I still played out this little scenario in my mind. We're sort of on a kind of a neighborhood street, a little bit like the Pune city center. And I always had this picture that somehow the day would come and we'd all be evicted, we'd be homeless, and we'd pack our things in suitcases. And I never thought of the modern rolling suitcases. I always thought of old-fashioned leather satchels with ties like this. And so we're all standing there holding leather satchels. I mean, the whole picture was ridiculous. But the whole crowd of us, 80 people, we're just crowded on the street right in front of where we used to live. We're all holding our satchels. We're all looking at each other and we're laughing and we're saying, okay, where do we go next? And it's not dissimilar to the fire that really did happen, but that feeling, of union with a greater reality, exemplified by people. But those people are real. But also what's really exemplified is this feeling of we're all in it together doing something that transcends the ups and downs of everyday life. And that is a personal choice. A personal choice that you build moment by moment. And my friends, I can't speak strongly enough to say there's nothing else more important. Whatever you're doing, studying, making money, raising your family, add to it. Building that superconscious relationship with yourself, with the world around you, and seek ye first the kingdom of God, and everything else will be added unto you. God bless you.
In the society that we live, there are many negative energies that flow.
Yes, indeed.
So how do I protect myself from these negative influences?
Take refuge in the superconscious. The negative influences are the battle of Kurukshetra. You're standing in the conscious mind. The negative influences are essentially the subconscious force persuading you that other people's negative energy actually can affect me. The answer to it is that when I am in the temple of divinity, nothing can affect me. Swami has many affirmations, a book called Affirmations for Self-Healing. You know, I stand protected in the fortress of higher consciousness, and nothing and no one can break through and touch me. It's a question of relative magnetism. Negative forces, everything is a matter of energy. If you're habituated to feeling subject to other people's negative energy and believe that you can be, and are not actively generating an independent connection with the light, then they will constantly pull you into their aura. So the battle is not against that. The battle is with you reaching up. This is where meditation, prayer, chanting, right living, positive thinking, healthy living, energization, I'm awake and ready, I'm positive, energetic. I mean, just feel the energy. I'm positive, energetic, enthusiastic. And someone says, your hair looks terrible today. I'm positive, energetic, enthusiastic. You know, it's a small thing, but that's sort of how it's exemplified. It's like people's energy to pull you down is just a vibration. Your energy to stay above it is another vibration. Where is your vibration? If you're habitually weak and low and don't do anything and eat terrible food and, you know, and just then and not do nothing but watch television, then any little like that will just knock you over. If you have been independently building your own aura, then just like a meteor, it can't get through. Or it comes, but by the time it reaches you, it's all burned up in the positive vibrations that you have. And if you are very subject to negative vibrations, get away from them if you can, but if you can't, do everything that you can to build yourself up in relationship to superconsciousness, not just ego, because that's a fragile power. This is a dynamic power. And yeah, this is a war. I mean, this is the society right now. There's this enormous negativity of just almost everything. You know, television, radio, billboards, traffic, movies, everything. It's just all designed to take the heart out of us. It's really, well, satanic is almost the only word you can use. It's just designed to destroy our happiness. And constant advertising that tells you that you're really not quite adequate unless. And these, sometimes I look at the picture of wealth that the advertisements give us that make us feel we're not good enough unless we have this stunning amount of money manifested in these material ways. It's just so out of the box. And if we don't have strength inside ourselves, it will constantly be pulled into that. So you have to go over here and build your strength, you know, or build your strength, you know, so that you have it. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's the incentive. And this is why we chose to incarnate on a planet that's such a mixed bag. We could have incarnated on a nicer one, but apparently we needed the contrast. So, okay, yes.
When you had just started exploring this new path of reaching to a super consciousness, there are people who doubt and question and ask you questions. What are you following? How? They just question and you get into dilemmas. So should you respond? How should you respond to those people's?
The test of negativity, Yogananda said, comes to every devotee. Sooner or later, on your quest for light, you will be faced with a force in the form of your mother, your father, your friends, your boss, somebody who's going to tell you that this is such a stupid idea, a dangerous idea. What could you be thinking? They may try to kidnap you from the ashram. I mean, it can go very far. It really can go far, and it has gone far. Okay? So first of all, you have to understand this comes to everyone. And it's just an opportunity for you to see how much faith you have in your own experience. It's really less about the path you're on than your faith in your own experience. If you are feeling the reality of it and you think it's true, and somebody who knows nothing about it or has made up a whole bunch of things or gotten somebody else to tell them, an authority, that this is wrong, it's a test of your faith in yourself. But I'm having a good experience from this, and so your opinion, you're just talking. I'm experiencing. However, usually when you're new on the path, you're not going to win the argument, because your relationship to it is a lot about feeling, and it's only a little bit articulatable. And when somebody's really against it, even that feeling often becomes a little waffly, and the things you say are easily demolished, and you end up sounding foolish. So it's usually not a good idea. Even a very experienced person usually can't win an argument against someone who's determined. So depending on the circumstances. But if it's possible, you should say things like, well, I'll keep your concerns in mind. That's an interesting point. I'll remember that. Or, it's working well for me now. I'll take it a step at a time. I understand your concern. I appreciate that you're thinking of me. Just lots of things that concede nothing. But at the same time, also don't argue too hard when you can't win. And so you hold your ground, absolutely. You don't say, oh yeah, I've had the same doubts myself, unless you have. You hold your ground completely, but you don't try to win them over either. And then you just quietly go about your business. You don't promise not to go to the ashram. You just say, I've discovered a lot when people have something to tell you, they're much more interested in telling you than they are in listening to you. So a lot of times, if you just let them tell you, you'd be surprised what you could not say and they don't notice. Really, I mean, it's amazing. Because I'm so articulate and always have an answer, that took me a long time to learn. My husband doesn't answer. He just doesn't feel the compulsion to answer. So people will present something to him and he'll appear to accept it completely. But he won't have accepted it at all. And it's a method that actually works pretty well. I said that yesterday talking about Swami Kriyananda. He wouldn't fight with you, but if he wouldn't be persuaded by you either. And so something like, is actually surprisingly effective. You can say nothing, you just make noises. You have that, acha. When some American asked Swami to explain that, he defined it this way: I exist, you exist. You see, they're trying to shake your confidence in yourself. God is trying to shake your confidence in yourself. So the battle is with you, not with them. Win the battle with yourself and it'll dissipate. Or it won't. Or they'll remain a thorn in your side for the rest of your life, and there you have it. You can't make everybody like you. You can love them, but they may not like you. My mother, she wasn't against what I was doing. She never understood what I was doing. She wasn't exactly against it. She wasn't exactly for it. If I had abandoned the ashram at any point, she would have been very happy. But at the very end of her life, last year, this is how she conceded it. I don't know, she said, kind of looking off into the middle distance. I don't know, she said. I really like having you around. Maybe it's something you're doing. That was all I ever got from her. I didn't need more. And that for her was a big concession. But if I'd argued with her, I don't think we ever would have gotten there. Yeah.
In order to build a super conscious relationship with others, there should be a reciprocation also?
No, not necessarily. No,
So
no.
while we can control ourselves, how can we influence others or can expect the same thing from
Oh, you've just asked the golden question that I haven't actually answered. Whether or not anybody else will change just because you have changed. Don't count on it. And part of what makes us so miserable is that somehow we imagine that we can change other people, that we ought to change other people, and even worse, that they want us to change them. You know, if somebody really wants your help, they will make it very clear to you. Most of the time, the help we offer isn't helpful or welcome. I don't mean to exaggerate that, but there's a real truth to that. People can only learn at their own pace. And people have very different priorities about the lessons they're learning, and they have very different rhythms about the timing of when they can receive new realities. And very often when we're living in subconsciousness, the fact that I know it and I can see it would be good for you is the only thing we're thinking about. We're not in superconsciousness, where we're actually feeling that person's reality and trying to find out if what we're offering them is actually their next step. That's the point. This is an exaggerated version, but a man who used to help people die. And so this woman writes, my Jewish grandmother is in a Hebrew home for old people in Brooklyn, New York. She doesn't have long to live. I want to sit next to her bed and read her the Tibetan Book of the Dead. This man writes back and says, don't even think of it. He said, sing her Yiddish love songs, right? It's like, just because you can see that this is a possibility, that's exactly, you have to get into their reality and feel where they're standing and try to understand what their next step is. Then you can be very, very helpful. But it requires, above all, faith in them and faith in God. That they can go forward in their own way, they have to learn their own lessons, and I don't have to run the whole universe and make them do it my way. I realized in my own life that what appeared to be a sincere desire to help people get it right was actually my own lack of faith that anybody in the world could live their own life without my help. And I really realized I had faith that I could live my life, that I could face difficulties, that I could learn lessons, but I actually really believed that nobody else could. And if they were struggling with something, it was up to me to just straighten them out and make it work, which was not really appreciated and was really ineffective, because it wasn't really my loving them, it was my fear that the world had to be just the way I wanted it to be. And when I finally let go of that fear and was able to just, how can I support you in where you're really trying to go? Well, you can influence people a lot more that way. You get a lot more of what you're trying to make happen. You have a lot more friends. You're invited to more parties. Because, I mean, you know, it's not attractive to have someone come over who's always explaining it to you. So yes, if you live more in superconsciousness, you can help and influence people more. Will they become what you think they should be? Probably not. Will they become who they're trying to be? Much more likely. But you see how much relaxation and faith in God this requires? That's why you have to go off to the side and exercise your spiritual muscles, so that when you're faced with it, you can win the battle between the subconscious and the superconscious in that moment. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's a very important question.
We all have some other negative instances in the past, and how do we sort of avoid to have thoughts about those events or persons involved in those events?
That is the battle of Kurukshetra, the subconscious mind running its tape over and over again, and the only thing that you can do is each time you fall into it, you pull yourself out of it. And then when you fall into it again, you pull yourself out of it again. And if you keep believing, one, that you can overcome it, and two, that there is no future in staying in it, you will win. And in the meantime, you do other things that expand your consciousness, that soften your heart, that give you a deeper connection. And if you're practicing Kriya, you can do the Kriya. And all I can say is it does work eventually. But we spend a long time digging those pits. And as much energy as we've put into digging them, it takes that much energy to get out of them. Not quite, because the divine helps us when we're trying to do the right thing. But all you have to do is not quit. And all you have to do is not buy into the fact that I'm justified. You know, I really have a right to feel this way. This one I get to keep. This one, you know, everything in God's world is good and perfect, but this person, he's outside of it. You know, and all of karma is fair, but this one isn't. You know, you play with those thoughts in your mind so that when the pit eats you, you fall into it, but not as deep. Because even if I feel this way, I know I'm wrong. So you play this double game. I am having a wrong attitude right now, but I'm really enjoying it. But it's a wrong attitude, but I'm going to have it for a while, and then later I'll deal with it. Once my husband, for a brief time, he was my boss. It was not a system that worked real well. So for a brief time, he was my boss, and he came and he told me that I was going to have to do this certain job, which I really was extremely anxious about doing. I didn't want to do it. So I became quite upset. And therefore, he became anxious because he was also my husband, not just my boss. And so he tried to tell me that I didn't have to do it. I said, no, the darn thing is I have to do it. If I didn't have to, I wouldn't be so upset. It's like, okay, I'm going to have a wrong attitude, a really bad attitude right now. And then when I'm done, I'll just go ahead and do it. My friend's son used to have tantrums. And their agreement was when he would start his tantrum, she would pick up his little body, she would put him in his room, she would shut the door, put the latch on the door, and he could have his tantrum in his room. So he was having his tantrum, and then it got quiet, so she unlatched the door and she opened it and she said, "Are you done, dear?" He says, "Not quite, Mommy." She shuts the door and he screams and yells a little longer. That's how I feel. Okay, Divine Mother, I don't want to have this terrible attitude anymore, but right now I'm going to have it. And then I hear her say, "Are you done?" And I say, "Not quite." All right. I think that is the end, because lunch isn't upon us. Thank you all very much. God bless you.